Welcome to Kelly's Quest, the transnational journey, 50 states and 50 stories. Illinois was the 21st state added to the Union and was home to one of our country's most important presidents, Abraham Lincoln. Then, in 1865, Illinois became the first state to ratify the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which abolished slavery. In 1885, the Illinois Civil Rights Act was signed into law, banning discrimination in public facilities and venues. Today, Illinois is still full of people who are focused on helping others. One such person is M.J. Craig, an occupational therapist with Chicago Public Schools. I sat down with M.J. at Forsyth Park Disc Golf Course to hear his story of working in a large public school system as an openly transgender man. I'm here with my wonderful friend, M.J. Craig. And full disclosure to you all, M.J. and I have been doing a lot of advocacy work with each other for many, many years. And I am so thrilled, M.J., that you are here with me on the show. And thank you for coming out here to Forsyth Park on this rainy, miserable day so that we could look at a disc golf basket. And maybe, if we're lucky, the skies will clear and we'll get to throw a little bit and I can teach M.J. how to play it. But MJ, I know first of all that you wear many hats as a human being. You are an educator, you're an occupational therapist, and all of these things are on top of you being a trans man. Can you just kind of tell me your concept of what it means to be an advocate for the trans community?
Sure, and I do think that I learned a lot while we were both at Wellesley Middle School, and I think I'd done advocacy before that, but I think I sort of took it from like, this is something I occasionally do to this is something I'm deliberately seeking out. So I think for me, advocacy is educating and fighting for your rights.
I'd like for you to discuss, do you remember all those health classes that we did at Wellesley Middle School together?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that we did was actually we did trainings for all of the teachers and staff at the school. And then the next year, one of the health teachers invited you and I to come back and speak to the students, actually. And I think, in general, that's the right way to go about it. I think it can be difficult if you start with the students and then educate the staff, because then if students have questions or concerns or they reference things that we'd talked about, the teachers wouldn't feel empowered to address those because they didn't necessarily know the context of what the students were talking about. So I think that ended up working out really well for us and for the school. And I give credit to the teacher who invited us to take it to the next level and allow us to speak to her students and to build it in as a part of the curriculum, rather than like, here's just another extra thing that we're just gonna sort of shove in somewhere and then never think about again, but having it be a part of something that every student did.
You were working in Chicago Public Schools.
Yes.
And can you kind of tell everybody what your role is in Chicago Public Schools?
My role in CPS is as an occupational therapist. So I work with students who have special needs, typically working on sensory concerns and fine motor skills. Last year I was in 5 different elementary schools and I had a caseload of about 65 students. So I went to the different schools to work with those students. So at some of those schools, I didn't spend very much time, and I'm not out at those schools, not because of any reason other than I just don't have relationships with people in the building. At the schools that I spend the most time at, I am out, and at those schools, it's been a combination of sort of like deliberate work where I've been able to work behind the scenes with another teacher to launch a Gender and Sexuality Alliance.
What was your school year like with COVID and everything?
Sure. So I've been in graduate school recently, and so I sort of missed the first 3 months of COVID in schools. So by the time I showed up, things were a little bit more figured out, but it's definitely we're seeing a significant increase in students who need all kinds of skill building. The social workers case is increasing, the OT, the PT. Students are just, they've fallen behind, and typically the students who need the most supports are the students who fell behind the most. There are the odd case of a student who is able to either who was able to increase gains, and certainly many students were able to maintain gains. But of course, it's 2 years later, so the bar is 2 years higher.
And that includes with occupational therapy, because
for sure.
I'm sure this is an ongoing buildings of skills for these kids.
Of course.
So, social equity group.
Yes.
How many students are happening with those? Is it in different schools? Is it the same?
So
ones?
that's at one particular school,
Okay.
and it's a pretty small school, and we have a group that ranges pretty much from 6 to 8. We started it this year, and when we started, we had 3 students, and then we had 4, and it's really been snowballing, and it's definitely a combination of students for whom this is, a self-identity and an important identity, but it's also for students for whom social equity issues are important. And so this is one of the social equity issues that's important to them, and so they're glad to be able to participate. And so for this year, our goal was sort of just to get a group of students together, build some trust and support within the group, and then next year we're working already with the administration to start doing school-wide education pieces. Anything from something as small as a bulletin board, to something much bigger, to a school-wide educational platform. So we'll have to see what happens next year. But
So it sounds like Chicago Public Schools are trying to become more inclusive.
I will actually say that this is, fortunately for me as a very out trans person, this is actually a great time to become a part of CPS. They've the Office of Sexual Health, Wellness, and Title IX has really made gender identity a huge part of their push in the last couple of years, and they've hired a couple of staff members who identify as genderqueer, use they, them pronouns, have gender presentations that blur the lines. So these are people who are very, very out and very vocal and very focused on making every school in CPS a safe place for LGBTQ students. And I really feel like, I can do, as someone who's in a few schools, I can do what I can, but I feel much safer doing that, knowing that there are these people at the district level who have my back, and they really do, and that makes a world of difference.
Education is the backbone. It is the schools, because not only do
we work in education, obviously.
We might be a little biased about the importance of education.
But everybody gets,
Everybody should go to school. Everybody should get an education. And in public education, I feel that in Massachusetts, and it sounds like where you're at, that things are changing. My principal at my school this year, June 1st, decked out head to toe in pride gear. Head to toe pride gear. Very, very, very out about it. And anytime something happens to me that someone questions, why do you have an out trans person? She is 100% behind me, supporting me. And you're right, that knowledge of knowing that you have an administration
Yes.
that has your back means that you can focus on being a teacher
Yes.
and a trans person next. But my students, when they see me as an open, authentic trans person, I've had them tell me I am the first adult trans person that they have ever seen. I had a kid the other day, MJ, and this was so hard. I said, is it always going to be this hard being transgender? Those are the questions that I need for trans kids to feel comfortable to ask.
And it's not something that they can necessarily ask a cisgender person, no matter how much of an ally or how knowledgeable or experienced or how much they love this student. It's not within their frame of reference.
Right. So the way that I answered this for him was I said, yes, your life is going to be a little bit more hard, possibly because you're trans. But look at me. I'm teaching. I'm playing sports. I've got a wonderful life. These kids need to see in education, we are their role models.
Yeah.
We are the people that they're like, okay, you made it. You are doing good.
So I don't have it with me, but one of the many ways that the district office was able to support me was they offered anybody who wanted them little cards that on one side said something along the lines of educating everyone, CPS, the Chicago Public Schools logo. So it looks like an official. It's the size of an ID, and that has a rainbow going across it. And then on the other side, it had information related to supporting LGBTQ youth. And they were designed to be put on ID badges, and I put mine, my ID badge was on one side and this was on the other side, which is just a really subtle way. So even if I wasn't officially out to every single person in every building that I walked into, people knew that this was that I at least was supportive and open to the LGBTQ community. And in addition to having that, I was also able to leave. I got like 25 for each of the schools that I worked in, and we have to swipe in. And so next to the machine that swipes in, I just left a little pile and let people who wanted to just grab one. And it was pretty cool to see people that I didn't know at all just show up with wearing them. And honestly, selfishly, as a queer person, it was great to walk into these buildings and know, like, here's somebody who might be an ally to me.
That reminds me, do you know that you were the first trans person I ever worked alongside in any type of professional work whatsoever? And we were both educators in Wellesley Public Schools in Massachusetts, and to walk down the hallways and just see another trans person,
I know,
was one of the most powerful things that could happen in that school for me, because I could have a hard day and I could walk by you and I'd be like, okay, we're here, I'm not alone. And just that subtle thing of knowing you were in there and seeing you in there, especially when in Massachusetts we got our rights. They passed a law that said that trans people cannot be discriminated against in Massachusetts. And you and I remember the day hugging each other, happy,
in the hallway.
Uplifting, right in the hallway, absolutely.
That hallway moment, I think, really stands out in my mind because I've been in so many other situations, and that there weren't any other trans people in my immediate day-to-day life at that point that I would see, just in my work life or in my neighborhood. And so there was nobody to grieve with me because something related to trans rights had not passed. And it was just this stark moment of, like, just having no one to share those feelings with, which honestly brought me right back to high school, being closeted and having gotten broken up with and not being able to tell people that I was heartbroken because I hadn't told them I was in a relationship in the first place, because it was a queer relationship and I went to Catholic school. And so I just had to pretend like everything was fine.
Can you kind of share your journey of discovery, of authenticity?
Sure. It actually goes back to before high school. I feel like I knew that I was always born kind of different, and always had a lot of female friends, assigned female at birth. My mom was really happy to raise me as like a strong feminist woman who did lots of sports and took care of themselves, and so she was really proud of the ways that I was sort of a tomboy. And then in 5th grade, through an event that was happening at school, I realized that there were women who were attracted to other women. And I realized that I was attracted to women, and that it wasn't a specific woman, which kind of seems weird to me. Like, I mean, if I look back, I'm like, oh yes, I had a crush on Grace Kelly and whoever else, because I watched movies from the 50s and 60s. But it wasn't that I had feelings for a particular person. It was just honestly, a moment of grace. Like, it was as if, like, all the sound cut out and there was just a light shining on me. And it was like, this is how you're different, like this. And I had this feeling of, like, wholeness to understand this thing about myself, as if, like, a puzzle piece fell into place. But I was like, 10 or 11 at this point. And then the very next feeling I had was, like, of terrible sadness, because I felt like this, being a member of the queer community, though I didn't even know what the word queer meant at the time, meant that I was always going to be lonely. And even at that age, I sort of remember thinking, like, well, I'll probably have people who are friends with me, but I'm never going to have, like, a romantic love. That's not, family in that way is never going to be a part of my life. The gender identity piece took much longer to figure out. Yeah, this was all 5th grade. I mean, I could almost tell you the day, because it was such a stark realization. The gender identity piece came on much slower. And then, I brought a girl to my senior prom with the, like, don't ask, don't tell sort of policy of my high school. And then in college, I started to see trans people and started to think that I had this discomfort with the label of lesbian, and I had this discomfort with my body that I had just sort of like, for a while I put it onto puberty, like nobody likes their changing body, like lots of people feel uncomfortable with whatever, and I just spent more time thinking about myself, and when I graduated college is actually when I was like, all right, I'm gonna like try this and never look back. I mean, it's a weird thing to think about trying, but I think I was saying I was trying it because fortunately I was in a really liberal, supportive circle of people who made room for me to be able to do that. But it was also just too scary to think of like, well, now I do this and it's forever. And I'm very much somebody who does things, though I'm impulsive, I do this kind of thing very slowly. And so it was, like, well, I'll ask some of my friends to use different pronouns. I was out at that point at work. I came out at work, which was a really social justice-minded environment. But, I didn't tell my family, even though they're lovely people, until basically the last moment. I told them 6 months before I knew I was going to start hormones, because I thought, at that point, I have to tell them. But I really put it off.
So when you were going through college, you played rugby. Like at this point, you said you had a little bit of an understanding that things were going on, that your gender identity might be a little bit different than other people's.
But it was like as fast as my sort of understanding of my sexual orientation was, it was the opposite for my gender identity. It was an absolute glacial thing. And maybe part of that was that I grew up in a less rigid environment, that my family was very okay with me, again, being a tomboy and being into all this sort of stuff. I was less often being forced to wear dresses and this kind of stuff. At formal events, I had like a blazer. When I was a kid, I had like a little blazer and like dress slacks. And, the blazer had darts because it was bought in the women's section of the store. But it was like, I was less often being forced to wear skirts. Though I will say my high school was Catholic, and we, on holy days of obligation, we had to wear dress, like we didn't have a uniform, we had dress codes. Okay. And I don't know, my senior year, I don't know if it was because I was older or I was leaving. That was the year I went to prom with a woman, but I was just like, forget this, and I followed the dress code of the boys, and I will say I looked cute. And one teacher.
Please tell me you have a photo.
I don't know. This is kind of pre-smart. This is definitely pre-smartphones. I don't know, because I did this on the real down low.
Nice.
I'm sure that my tie was tied terribly because I didn't know what I was doing. But I wore one of my dad's ties and a sweater vest that I happened to have. Anyways, and one teacher told me, I did not get detention for it, but one teacher told me if I did it again that I would get detention. But I think people knew what I was doing. But it was. I tell you, Kelly, it was don't ask, don't tell. They couldn't acknowledge what I was doing, and I kind of couldn't acknowledge what I was doing.
How did your family navigate this with you, or did you take the lead on it, or what was that?
I took the lead. This was like, I don't want to say that they came kicking and screaming, because I think that's over dramatic. But I don't think anybody was like excited for me. I think. So this sexual orientation piece, I came out to my family. I remember the moment of telling them so vividly and pieces of how I felt during the conversation that happened afterwards. I remember, but I think there was more of a precedent at the time for that. That was something that could be understood, Rosie O'Donnell had a TV show, There were some examples of what that life could look like.
Okay.
And it probably feels more analogous to a straight life than a trans life feels to a cisgendered life. So while people weren't excited about it and there was a lot of awkwardness, we got over that within a couple of years. The trans identity took like 5 years, I think, for things to really feel comfortable. And I know that it was particularly hard for my mother, especially because I went through physical changes and that was very scary for her. All of these things being said, I never worried that I was going to be kicked out of the house. I wouldn't have come out in high school if I thought I was going to be kicked out of the house. I consciously remember feeling like being nervous and knowing I wanted to have this conversation, and then I'm not sure what made me realize, but something made me realize that my parents weren't going to kick me out, and that just took like a huge weight off my shoulders. That no matter what was going to happen, I wasn't going to be homeless. And then the gender identity thing, it didn't happen until I already had a really amazing, supportive friend group, work environment. I'd moved to Massachusetts, so I knew that regardless of how difficult this was going to be, I had the support that I needed to do it. But it just felt like I was breaking my mother's heart. I mean, it really felt for a while like I was murdering the daughter she thought she had, which is terrible.
Did she ever say that to you?
No.
My mother did say that to me.
Yeah, it is a very common reaction. And I fortunately had a heads up that might happen, because otherwise I think I would have just been like, what the heck is going on? This is bananas. Like,
I'm here. Look, I'm here.
I'm literally here. I wrote about it at the time, probably melodramatically, but I described it as simultaneously being the child lost at sea and the ocean that swallowed her up. Because I couldn't figure out any other way to describe it. And I think that enough time has passed now that it's really clear to people that I'm like so the same person. And the things that they love about that child are still there, and that person, and that I can still participate fully in their lives. I just use a different bathroom.
I mean, I think that for me, what happened when I finally affirmed my authentic self, and everybody knows this, a lot of bad habits slipped away a lot of coping mechanisms that were unhealthy slipped to the wayside, because I was using them to squash my authentic self.
And that is a researched fact, that too many, certainly, people who have a gender identity outside of the binary use really unhealthy coping mechanisms to deal with it. And that when you're able to live your own life, a lot of that, you can let go a lot of that stuff. You don't need it anymore. Much of a struggle as it could be at times, I do want to give my family credit that they would not know that I am the same person, if anything, a little better, a little happier, had they not been willing to go on the journey with me. But yeah, my mom thought she was going to lose me.
Did you have to give up sports when you transitioned a little bit?
Sports had been such an important thing to me. I mean, I played sports every season, every grade. I hiked in the summer, I canoed, it was just, I did everything all the time. And so the timing of me transitioning, I also stopped competing in team sports. And that was something, I think I might have waited to transition so that I could have continued to play sports in college, because I think that just would have been too hard. To have the teams I was on playing without me would have just wrecked me. But I mean, I remember, you can play team sports after you graduate college, and I just, at that point, I sort of took a little time off sports, and then I started running. And I can mark myself as male, but I'm in the middle of the pack. No one cares that I'm trans, because I'm finishing 20,000th out of 45,000 runners.
That's still pretty impressive.
Oh no, I mean, thank you. That's no shade, but it just means I'm not getting the kind of scrutiny that someone in your position is, where even though you're playing a solo sport, you're winning, you're getting money, you're getting prizes, you're getting attention. So people don't care. So it's nice, it's gratifying to see now that some races are starting to figure out how to have transgender people and non-binary folks participate in the sports as their authentic selves.
Do you have any role models, any heroes? Are you a little fan person of anyone that's like in the running community or in the trans community that you really look up to and you're like, this person has helped me, this is a person that I see myself kind of learning from, and thank you for blazing this path?
This is going to feel disingenuous, Kelly, but I'm really serious when I feel like that you are a generation ahead of me when it comes to fighting these battles. And so, I mean, I look up to you. I think you're probably the only professional trans athlete whose name I remember. I do come across people.
Well, thank you, first of all. I do appreciate you saying that about me, because I do feel like that I'm working my butt off for the community. This weekend, I kind of felt like was an important thing to make happen so that they would see trans women athletes competing at an elite level. But here's the thing, guess who beat me? A cisgender woman. Shock, a cisgender woman can be better than a transgender woman at sports.
I know, yeah. Put away your panic.
Do you have full protections in the state of Illinois? Like, what do you know about those things?
I lose track, to be honest. It is deliberate. I deliberately work for non-for-profits that are funded by the federal government because most of the time, most of my working adult life, the federal government has had more protections than the vast majority of states. And so because I work for public schools and just other organizations, you know, non-for-profits that get this federal funding, they are tied to federal policies. So that has been a deliberate choice. Honestly, Kelly, this maybe makes me sound like not a great trans advocate, but sometimes I don't follow the minutia of all of this stuff because it's pretty hard to wake up knowing tomorrow I'm going to have fewer rights. I keep track of the rights of my students within CPS, and I keep track of my paperwork rights. You know, do I have the right to change my birth certificate? I was born in Illinois, that sort of stuff. You know, when I'm going to travel to Canada soon, and I keep track of that kind of stuff. But
So were you able to change everything in Illinois?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Illinois is one of the states and has actually been for a while. And in general, Illinois and Chicago specifically have relatively progressive policies.
Was it a pretty simple process, or did you have to go
It is
stand in
not a
front of a
simple
court and have
process.
to put your notice in a newspaper and all that?
No, it's not as difficult as changing your name.
Okay, good.
But the paperwork, it does not make sense. It contradicts itself. This happens a lot in bureaucracy, I find. You know, fill out Form B. Form B requires Form C. You read Form C, which somehow cancels out Form A. So it took someone going with me to just being like, this is how I'm spending the day. It doesn't matter how long I'm taking. I have water, I have snacks, I have a backpack. I have a friend with me, and we're just gonna, this is just gonna get done. And I was pretty nervous.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big moment. Like, I remember my name change. I remember my birth certificate change. Those are very distinct points in my life.
We have. I mean, I've knock on sort of this plastic coated metal. You know, I haven't spent that much time in front of a judge, right? It's pretty weird that, you know, for your name change, that, you know, that has to be, that I had to, you know, rise and sit down and, Your Honor, and.
Yeah, I didn't enjoy it because there was a long line of people waiting for criminal offenses in that.
I mean, you're right. You're right in there with every. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I was actually really lucky in that case that the courthouse had seen a number of sort of people doing name changes before, and they were able to tell me when I went to get information and to get the paperwork, like, come here right when the court opens, tell us what you're here for, and we'll get you in immediately, because it's a very quick process. For all that it's awkward, it's a very quick process. And so they just like, yes. You know, they got some of us through, and then they started the criminal proceedings, because otherwise I would have been sitting in the court waiting for these criminal proceedings, which could have taken days, you know, to just in the back waiting my turn. So they did make an effort to get me through.
Thank goodness.
Right, but that's all, you know, if the same people, no, I'm serious, if the same people, and this is just some random, you know, administrative assistant at the courthouse in the city of Cambridge, if she had been like, you know, screw to the trans community, she could put me right on the end of the docket, and I could have been there for God knows how long.
Yep. And it's a shame that I feel like as trans people, we are constantly having to prove to the world that we are not cheats and lies. And
I'm so appreciative of the people who do things like this, who make it as easy as possible for me, but I hate the fact that I have to rely on their goodwill.
Yep.
That I have to find the person in the DMV, or hope that I just come across the person in the DMV who's not going to look weirdly when I'm submitting my, you know, change of gender
Yep.
form.
Luckily, there's a lot of organizations in Illinois and other states that will now help you go through this process. So if you are in that process of looking to change your gender identity markers on your birth certificate or your name on your driver's license, there are organizations now that are helping a lot more with that. Freedom for All Americans
Actually,
will help you with it. Go for it.
Part of Chicago Pride was there was a month of events, right? And there were 2 different events. And I want to say one of them was GLAAD and one was maybe the Howard Brown.
Okay, yep.
Where they were like, it's 3 hours, we'll have, you know, people who are versed in this, we'll bring all the paperwork, you come and we will help you with all your paperwork related to gender identity. And I didn't need to go to one of those, but I was like, this is amazing.
That is amazing.
This is awesome, and this is 1000% part of Pride, because of course, Pride is very much about celebration and community and coming together. And like sort of storing up all that goodwill that you then have to like slowly spend over the year. But it is definitely should be about supporting our community.
Yes, one thing I do want to say is it has stopped raining. There is a disc golf basket.
Should we play disc golf?
Not bad.
Well, I hit something.
Yes. Now here you go, Titus. Come on out of the camera. So reach back and then just really. There you go. That's better. Yeah, you hit the tree.
Heavier, more substantial.
A little bit heavier. Yep.
Same motion.
Same motion. Try to keep an eye on where you're going to be throwing into. Try to come back up to here.
Wow, that was easier.
Ta-da!
Thanks.
This is called a learning curve. Try it again with that one now.
Is this the mid distance?
This is the mid-range, yes.
Mid. Oop.
This is Cal, everybody. This is MJ's wonderful dog. You've met Titus, my wonderful dog. Titus is a disc dog. So this is by far the most important part of the game, the putting part of it. What you have to do is somehow or another make that disc land in that basket. And that's how disc golf works.
Hey.
See, this game is easy.
Wow, I was staring way to the right, but it still went way to the left. Nice, dang. The thing I'm sort of curious about, Kelly, is it feels really important to me when I'm competing to really be out as a trans person. So like the shirt that you're wearing, like I love to run in that shirt. Because it just feels like I want other trans people or non-binary people or just people in the LGBTQ community to know like we can be athletes, and you know, that's just something that feels really important to me.
Adina can tell you, she's behind the camera, everybody, so you can't see her. Adina carried my bag for me this weekend at the tournament, and I have a trans pride stick pin here and a gay pride pin on the other side of it. So for me, one of the reasons I came to the U.S. Women's Disc Golf Championships was because there is so much pushback against trans women athletes right now that I wanted to go to a huge I wanted to go to a huge women's only event. There were over 320 women competing this weekend, and I was one of them. And it felt very important, and the beautiful part of it was every time I outed myself, every time I said something about it, everybody's like, just play disc golf. We don't care.
Cool.
And it seems to be a subset of very vocal people that do care. But those people aren't the majority, I don't think.
I know, but the voice can be so deafening.
It can be so, so deafening, exactly.
So... Oh, man.
Oh my goodness. Woo!
Getting closer.
That's you are the 13th state.
Woo!
Illinois is number 13. 13 is a lucky number right now.
I love you so much. I love you too, Kelly.
Okay. And cut. I want to thank everyone who made a donation. Your generosity is what makes the Transnational journey possible. To help grow the show, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.